Hello and welcome back. On today's episode I'm going to be buttoning up the bottom end, and I'm going to start off with the oil pump. Now there's a couple of reasons why we're starting off with the oil pump, and number one is this has to go on before the sump. As this groove here, that is where one of the sump gaskets fit. And the other is because the oil suction pipe bolts onto here, and this needs to be on first before we can bolt that on. Now as you can see, I've cleaned this up as much as but it's a good idea when this is out to take this plunger out and clean it, as it has been known for these to gum up and stick, which then makes your oil pressure all over the place. But what this plunger actually does is open up once the desired oil pressure has been reached and redirects the flow. And to take this out, all we need to do is take this little circlip out here, and underneath there is a washer seat, a spring and a plunger. So there's the spring seat, and then the spring, and then you can carefully poke in this hole here. Then grab a magnetic pickup tool, pull the plunger out. Now we want to make sure this bore in here is nice and clean and not too scuffed up, and that the plunger and the spring are all nice and clean. So the next bit I have tried to research on the internet, but everywhere I look there is arguments conflicting against each other, and that is to space out the bottom of the spring. That is essentially going to make the spring tension higher, which will allow the valve to open at a higher oil pressure rate. And to do that, it's simply the plunger, and then the spring, and then the spring seat, and then simply to push the spring down with a couple of washers or shims on top to make that spring just a bit more taut. So to assemble this back together, I don't want to put it in dry, so I'm going to put a little bit of assembly lube, round the top, a little bit of assembly lube around the plunger, pop that in, just a little bit of lubricant on the spring as well. Now it's a very good idea to change the old split pin to a nice new one. It is going to help you get the split pin in, as you're now going to have to put this all together under a little bit more pressure. Then the spring seat and your washer. Push them down with a pair of needle nose pliers, just enough so that you can get your split pin started. And then open up your needle nose pliers, push on the sides, and bend the split pin over. Now next thing is the gears, the whole internals of the oil pump. Now these are my gears that I have pulled out of this engine, but I don't think I'll be putting these back in, as something nasty has been through it at some point, and now I don't trust this. So I've got myself another set of gears that I've had laying about out of another oil pump, which are in a lot better condition. Now the oil pump gears do run on this race here and this race here, so I'm going to put a little bit of assembly lube on there first. Make sure that moves nice and freely, doesn't snag up anywhere. Now I want to make sure most of this mating face is clear of assembly lube. As you need to put this cover on. Now this is almost ready to install, but I haven't put the seal in yet. I will do this later and I will show you why in a bit. But first I need to put this very important O-ring in. If that isn't in, the oil pressure could go anywhere it likes. So on this oil pump you might see there is a few little grooves back here, and that is actually for the sealant to stick into. That is how the oil pump is going to seal to the block. So make sure the surface is nice and clean and put a sensible amount of RTV on. Now to put the oil pump on, make sure that little O-ring is still there. Now that only slid on so easily because this seal wasn't on. I've seen it happen too many times, including to myself. When you put the oil pump on with this seal still in, the seal turns itself inside out, and then pretty much you have to replace the seal anyway. So I'm going to do this with the seal out. Now it's just a case of remembering which bolts went where, as most of them are different lengths. Now these are torqued up to 14 to 19 foot-pounds. So a friend has lent me another torque wrench, so let's try it again. Once it's all dry, the excess RTV can just be scraped off. Now since we're here, I'm going to put the main seal in as well, mainly because it's going to stop anything going inside the engine while I'm building everything else, and it's easy to get to at the minute. So I have bought the Jass Performance installation kit. I bought this off of Boffy Racing. I'll put the link in the description. But this is going to make life a lot easier to install this seal without ruining it. It's a really simple design. Grab your seal, grab the small part of the kit, push it in the seal, on the crankshaft, put the outer over top, push it in, and then grab your crank bolt. And then wind it in till it stops. This kit is even easy to use when the engine is still in the car. There's no need for swinging hammers or anything, just wind that seal in. As you can see, it's installed the seal perfectly. The inner race of this seal is still facing the right way, and it's nice and home where it should be. Next is for the rear main seal. This too, I'm leaving the seal out, and it's nice and clean. It also has a gully for the RTV to go. Now this has two lengths of bolts. The longer ones go in the top and the shorter ones go in the bottom. Just going to give this a light coating of RTV. Now this too has had to go on before anything else, because it also has the gully for sump gasket, but for the rear. So I've got my sump back from powder coating. Everything's nice and clean, but I have to prep the sump first, as everything else inside here, like the suction tube and whatnot, is done really quickly once you get the RTV on. So I want to make sure this is ready to go when all that sealant's on. So to go in the sump, to replace the old sump baffle, I have got the kit from Skidnation. There are 3 different versions of this kit. You can buy just this, just that, or all of it together. This part works by trapping the oil to where it needs to be, allowing it through the flaps but not back, to keep it at the suction cup. So under harsh acceleration, that oil is going to be right there, right at the suction cup. And this to stop oil splashing back up the sump and trying to keep it right down in the bottom of the sump. To install this sump baffle kit, it's really simple. All you got to do is make sure your sump is really clean. Pop in the bottom part, that will only go one way round, so you can't get it wrong. Pop in the other part. Again, you can't get that wrong, as it's got these little pins here in the sump that stick up, and they've made holes to locate them. Line all the holes up, and then it's just 6 bolts. But since it is the sump, and it is near all the rotating assembly, I'm just going to put a little bit of Loctite on all the bolts. Now you can see sort of how this works. The oil suction pipe sits down in here, and there's little gaps all the way around the edge, just so there's enough space for the oil to go down, and it keeps all that oil right in the bottom there, right where it needs it at the suction pipe. It even has the little cutout for the oil dipstick tube. Next, I'm going to put the barbed fitment on for the turbo return line. I've put a good amount of PTFE tape on it to help seal the threads when I wind it in. Now, the next few steps are going to move pretty damn quickly. So if you are using this video to help you, make sure you've got everything ready before you start. Make sure all your mating surfaces are nice and clean, and make sure you have your 3 gaskets. 2 that go here, and your oil suction pipe gasket. And also make sure you have enough RTV sealant and all your torque settings ready. So now it's time for the oil pan baffle, which on this engine, since it's the VVT bottom end, it actually strengthens the main caps together as well. But there's no gasket for it, it's just RTV. So we're going to put a good layer on here and here, ready for that to be bolted down. Next is for the oil strainer or oil suction pipe, which bolts on here. Now if you forget this gasket, you're going to have a really bad time, as the oil just won't be sucked up properly and won't go to where it needs to go, and you'll have rod knock before you know it. Now, these 2 bolts and this nut are only done up to 10 Newton meters, so don't go crazy. Now we're almost ready for the sump. All we've got to do is run a bit of RTV around here, put our half moon gaskets in at either end, and torque her down. The big half moon gasket goes at the back on the rear main. And the small one goes on the front. They have got tabs, so you can't really get them wrong. Now it's time for the sump. I've got to be a little bit careful, as I've got the new sump baffles in. I've got to be careful of guiding the suction pipe in. All the bolts are same round the sump, apart from the 2 back ones, which are really long. These 2 are only torqued down to 70 to 95 inch-pounds, which is about 10 Newton meters. Now that's all torqued down, all I've got to do is wait for the RTV to dry and cut off the excess, because apparently I like a lot of RTV. Now, as you may have seen, I didn't put in the rear main seal. I will be doing that once the engine is off of the engine stand itself, as it's going to be a little easier for me to do so. Catch me next time when I start playing with the head. The 2 products I did use today are down in the description below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.